The story I'm about to tell was a turning point in my life, something I never imagined experiencing, and which haunts me to this day in moments of silence. It's real, it happened to me, and despite the years that have passed, I can still hear the echoes of that horrifying night. I was a private investigator at the time, a solitary job that often left me immersed in dark mysteries and secrets. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what was to come. It all started when I received a call from a woman named Marissa. Her voice was low, trembling, as if she was being watched while she spoke. She explained that her brother Nathan had disappeared weeks earlier, and the authorities had practically given up on searching for him. The case didn't seem unusual at first. Disappearances happen, especially in big cities like ours. But there was something in the way she spoke that deeply unsettled me. A desperation that went beyond a simple loss. Marissa told me that Nathan had been acting strange before he vanished. He had moved into a small apartment in the suburbs, and in the weeks leading up to his disappearance, he had stopped responding to calls and messages. His last communication was a cryptic email, something that resembled a cry for help but made no sense. I decided to take the case and headed to Nathan's apartment, an old and poorly lit building, hidden between narrow, abandoned streets. When I arrived, I felt an oppressive atmosphere, something invisible but palpable. It was as if the place was steeped in fear. Inside the apartment, the air was heavy, and the smell of mold was almost suffocating. I searched the rooms for clues. The walls were covered with newspaper clippings, images of unknown faces, disconnected diagrams, and handwritten notes, as if Nathan had been trying to piece together an insane puzzle. In the center of one of the walls, in large, bold letters, was written, "He's coming for me." That left me uneasy. Who was coming for Nathan? And why did he believe he was being hunted? Among the newspaper clippings, a pattern began to emerge: murders. All the articles spoke of brutal killings in different cities, but there was a clear connection between them. All the victims were found in remote areas, with their bodies meticulously mutilated. Next to each body, a strange symbol was carved into the ground, a mark that, according to the reporters, resembled a deformed spiral. As I read the articles, my heart began to race. Nathan had become obsessed with these murders. He believed that a serial killer was on the loose, traveling from city to city, hunting his victims with terrifying precision. But that wasn't all. He had a theory that he was apparently following, that the killer possessed supernatural abilities. The spiral mark that appeared next to the bodies seemed to be a signature, something that transcended mere symbolism. It was as if time and space themselves were being distorted around these murders. I spent hours reviewing Nathan's notes and clippings until I found something that chilled me to the bone. There was a list of names, and the last name on the list was mine. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Nathan's theory was insane, but what if, somehow, he was right? What if this serial killer was really hunting specific people, following a logic that only he understood? I began to feel paranoid, sensing that I was being watched. I was overtaken by the feeling that something was deeply wrong. I decided to leave, but as I walked down the dimly lit hallways of the building, I realized I was no longer alone. My footsteps echoed, but there was another sound, more subtle, like soft breathing just behind me. I abruptly stopped and turned around, but there was no one there. The hallway was empty, shadowy, except for the flickering lights. But I knew at that moment something was very wrong. The next day, Marissa called me in a panic. She had found something in Nathan's room that she hadn't noticed before, an old cassette tape. I asked her to bring the tape to my office, and later that afternoon, she arrived, with sunken eyes and a pale face. There was something disturbing about her presence, as if her very shadow was darker, denser. It was as if despair had taken hold of every fiber of her being. I put the tape in the player. For a few seconds, we only heard static until a male voice began to speak. It was Nathan. If you're listening to this, it's already too late for me. I tried to warn, I tried to hide, but he always knows. He always finds you. There's no escape. He's watching me. I know you feel it too. It's no use running. His time is different from ours. He hunts in the shadows, in the places no one looks. When he chooses you, you'll know. And when you know, it's already too late. The tape ended, and I sat in silence, trying to process what I had just heard. Marissa started to cry, and I felt a wave of panic wash over me. Something was coming. Something I couldn't see, but that was lurking. That night, when I returned home, I felt a strange presence. A primal fear took hold of me, and I knew something was watching me from the shadows. I spent days unable to sleep. The walls of my apartment seemed to pulse with an energy I couldn't explain. I tried to stay calm, but something inside me knew I was being hunted. And then, one day, he came. It was late at night when I woke up to the sound of footsteps in my apartment. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. The paranoia had been overwhelming for days, but the steps were real, slow, and deliberate. I reached for the gun I always kept in my nightstand, my heart racing. As I stood up, the room was engulfed in an oppressive silence, as if the very air had thickened. I left the bedroom cautiously, gripping the weapon tightly in my hand. The hallway was dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of the streetlights filtering through the windows. The sound of footsteps had stopped, but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. Every shadow seemed alive, every corner hiding a secret. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I searched the apartment, room by room, but found nothing. Everything was exactly as I had left it, yet the sense of unease persisted. Something wasn't right, and I could feel it in my bones. Then I saw it. At the far end of the hallway, near the door, something was scratched into the wall. I approached slowly, my breath caught in my throat. It was the same spiral symbol that had been found near the victims' bodies, the same symbol Nathan had been obsessed with. The lines were jagged, rough, as if carved with frantic hands. I froze, staring at it in disbelief. How had it gotten there? Before I could react, a knock echoed from the front door. 3 loud, deliberate knocks that seemed to reverberate through the entire building. I pointed the gun towards the door, my hands shaking. For a moment, I considered calling the police, but something deep inside told me that no one would be able to help me now. This wasn't something they could fight. Slowly, I approached the door. My fingers trembled as I unlocked it, the metallic click seeming deafening in the silence. I hesitated for a second, gathering my courage, then swung the door open. There was no one there. The hallway outside my apartment was empty, the shadows stretched long by the dim overhead lights. But something caught my eye, a piece of paper, folded neatly, lying on the floor just beyond the threshold. I bent down cautiously and picked it up, my pulse quickening. As I unfolded it, I saw that it was covered in writing, hastily scribbled words that didn't seem to follow any coherent order. But among the chaos, one sentence stood out, clear and unmistakable: "You're next." My blood ran cold. I backed into the apartment, slamming the door shut and bolting it. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of everything. Was this some kind of sick joke? Or was Nathan's theory about the killer, about whatever was hunting him, actually real? I stayed awake the rest of the night, sitting in the dark, gun in hand, staring at the door. But nothing else happened. The apartment remained silent, though the weight of the threat lingered in the air like a suffocating fog. The next morning, I decided I couldn't stay there any longer. Something was after me, something far beyond my understanding, and I wasn't going to wait around to find out what it wanted. I packed a bag and left the apartment, trying to ignore the feeling that eyes were following me, watching from the shadows. As I drove away, my thoughts raced back to Nathan. I had to find out more about what had happened to him. Marissa had mentioned that he'd been staying in a remote cabin before he disappeared, a place he had gone to for solitude, where he believed he could escape whatever was chasing him. I needed to go there, to see for myself what he had found. The drive to the cabin took hours, winding through dense forests and desolate roads. As I got closer, the trees seemed to close in around me, the light fading, even though it was still early in the afternoon. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun was sinking low in the sky, casting long, ominous shadows over the landscape. The cabin itself was small and isolated, surrounded by thick woods. There was something unsettling about the place, even from a distance. It looked abandoned, forgotten by time, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't empty. I stepped out of the car, the air crisp and cold. Every instinct told me to turn around, to leave that place and never look back. But I couldn't. I had to know what had happened to Nathan, and what had brought him to this place. The door to the cabin was unlocked. Inside, it was dark and musty, the air thick with the scent of decay. Dust covered the furniture, and cobwebs hung in the corners. But what immediately caught my attention was the wall in the main room. Just like in Nathan's apartment, it was covered in newspaper clippings, diagrams, and notes. And in the center of it all was the same spiral symbol, larger and more prominent than ever. As I approached the wall, something caught my eye, a journal, lying open on the table. It was Nathan's. The pages were filled with his handwriting, frantic and erratic, detailing his descent into paranoia and fear. He wrote about the killer, about how he had been marked, how he had tried to run but couldn't escape. He described the feeling of being hunted, of seeing shadows move when no one was there, of hearing footsteps in the dark. And then, near the end, his words became almost illegible, as if written in a frenzy. "He's coming for me. There's no escape. He always finds you." I closed the journal, my hands trembling. Nathan had been right. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just a man. It was something far more terrifying, something that defied explanation. Suddenly, a noise came from outside. The sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, crunching through the leaves. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized I wasn't alone. I ran to the window, peering out into the fading light. At first, I saw nothing. But then, just beyond the tree line, I saw a figure. It was tall, impossibly tall, its shape distorted by the shadows. I couldn't make out its face, but I could feel its eyes on me, watching. Panicking, I grabbed my bag and bolted out of the cabin. The sun had almost completely set, and the forest around me was plunged into darkness. I ran, not knowing where I was going, only that I had to get away. But no matter how fast I ran, I could hear the footsteps behind me, getting closer. It was chasing me.